This is the second of the series of in foreign, the quest for the meaning of life. And last week we have a fantastic session with Reverend Hun Shi and Nippon Metta. And I would like to summarize just in one slide what they have talked a little bit, and then we go to open up for tonight's discussion. This is Reverend Hun Shi, who has been a monk for more than 45 years. And when he was younger, he was, all macho about the Western movie and being strong. And then he stumbled into meditation. And then he became a monk. When he was a young monk, he and another monk took 2-year, 6 months phenomenal trip, bowing 3-step and making 1 bow, walking 3-step and making 1 bow, from South Pasadena to Ukiah, cover a distance of 800 miles, and more than 2 years and 6 months. And through that, he has transformed. And so he shared his experience. Basically, what he has done nowadays is that during the period of seeking for world peace, he has discovered that helping others is the fountain of joy. The other speaker and Nippon Metta, when he was a young man, he was a great computer technologist, and then he began to help people, writing web pages and so forth. And one day he just decided to quit because he said helping others is much more fun, right? And then he shared his 3 phases in life after that, namely, first phase, do what I love, and second phase, love what I do, and third one is do what I do. Right? Basically, the opportunities seek after him. He just do whatever is coming, and he set up a organization called Service Base. It's all volunteer based. Now over half 500,000 volunteers all over the world, and their intention is to transform the transaction-based society into a gift economy. And over the course of discussion last week, they asked many questions. One of them is, what's the reason to get out of bed? All right, without meaning, why do you get out of bed? Of course, we all get out of bed because we have to go to work and do this and do that. The question is, what's driven us? And what they have come together is that in their quest for the meaning during this journey, long and younger, 45 years and 20 years, and they come to the conclusion that what they are doing, the meaning is in harmony with the Tao. Basically, it's a shift of worldview from I to we. Well, this is a quote from Marilyn's slogan many years ago. All right. So I will go through this 2 diagram, which is talking about our interconnectedness. The Tao diagram, of course, talk about you're in me and I'm in you. And this is a Buddhist called Indra's net, which is basically a diagram in which each jewel in the net reflects every other thing. It's a hologram because you take anything, cut it in half, it still contains the whole thing. All right, I won't go into the detail, but this is the summary of what these two outstanding speakers talked about last week. It is great pleasure to introduce the two outstanding speakers tonight. And Rabbi David Baron and Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. And our translator to Chinese, Dr. Huali Yuan. And by the way, we have really a group of outstanding translators for this series. Rabbi David Baron is the rabbi of the largest arts and entertainment industry synagogue in the US, located in Beverly Hills. And by the way, he's also the New York Times best-selling author of the management lessons from Moses. And it's amazing what he has done in this book, synthesized leadership into 60 guiding principles. But the most wondrous thing about this book, at least from my viewpoint, is how a leader, the leadership of Moses is described in transforming a group of slaves into freedom fighters in the course of 40 years, during which time that Moses established laws, established everything, get the next generation ready, then send them into the promised land, where with the new leader. And he never entered the promised land. He stayed in Mount Sinai. Fantastic, lessons for the current leadership, because not only you have to have the skill, but you have to dip deeply into the ethical disciplines. And I was so moved by his book. Our other speaker, Dr. Marilyn Smith, is an acclaimed social scientist and award-winning author. And she has written so many books, and which talk about all kinds of things. Although her training is anthropology, but I would categorize her as transdisciplinary, because he melted the science, the spirituality, and all that into one. I was most impressed with her when I get to know her, when she was chief scientist and then CEO of Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was created by Dr. Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. And when Dr. Mitchell come back from the moon to the Earth, circling around the Earth, he suddenly have a sort of an experience of enlightenment. And the experience is all in one and one in all. And he could not, as a physicist, he could not explain that phenomenon. So he began to study Indian texts and found out samadhi. He said, that's my experience. So he set up the institute to connect, to study science and consciousness. And that institute really flourished under the guidance of Marilyn, who have developed so many books, education program, outstanding research. And so that has really helped make that study flourish today. Almost everywhere you go, you find her touch in this field everywhere. So with that introduction, and I will suggest the format for this evening. That is that each speaker has 15 minutes to talk about their view about the quest for meaning. Right? And then we have 30 minutes Q&A where you two play ping pong. All right. and then we have 15 minutes and Q&A. So
and share.
So with that, I will ask Rabbi David to go first to share a thought.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raymond. I want to begin by saying I'm honored to share this panel with Marilyn. She's such a prolific author and has such great insights. And I want to thank you, Raymond, for inviting me. I'm honored that you shared my background, some of my background, and that you invited me. And I want to thank you for creating this opportunity because it's so important. The word quest says it all. Those of us who are questing, who are seeking enlightenment, knowledge, elevated consciousness, that's where the future rests, with people who are concerned enough to want to elevate their consciousness and to seek and learn that life holds a meaning for each and every one of us. I'd like to dedicate my participation tonight in memory of a wonderful man who introduced us, Robert Bloch, who passed away. He's in the next dimension of being, and Robert was a visionary and a very compassionate man, a decent man, and someone who I value tremendously as a friend, and I know you did as well. And I'd like to dedicate some of my presentation tonight in his memory, with your permission. So let me begin by speaking about this pursuit. It's really interesting to be given an opportunity to speak about a subject like this, and the subject that intrigues all of us, those of us who aren't so addicted to our iPhone and to our technology that we don't take a moment to think about, well, why am I here? Where am I going? What do I hope to accomplish in my life? And is the accomplishment out there or inside of me? And for many people, sadly, the accomplishment is outside, not inside. And what I'd like to do is take a moment to talk about some of my experiences in this regard, because I'm a big believer that life is meant to be lived with others. We're realizing that in this pandemic environment more than ever, that while, yes, we have Zoom technology to allow us to hold a program of this nature, the truth is we hunger for human contact. We hunger for connection. A mask covers our face. What a tragedy. We want to see the expressions on our face, to be able to read one another, to learn if one of us may happen to be depressed or sad. And then we can respond by attempting to elevate that person's state of mind. I think that more than ever, especially during this time, we're reminded of our fragility as human beings and how important it is to live with others. In the Jewish tradition, there is a Hebrew word which means alive, and that word is chai. Chai means alive. But when you use that word in the plural, it becomes life, chayim, I-M suffix, meaning in the plural. And it teaches us a lesson that, yes, you can be alive, but if you're truly to live your life, you must live it in connection with others and on behalf of others. And so I think that takes me to the next experience that I had with Karen Armstrong. Many of you are familiar with her. She wrote A History of God. And Karen, Dr. Armstrong requested that many of us participate in creating an exciting charter. She said one of the elements that is found in all religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, is compassion. That's at the core of all of these religious practices. And she said, let's use technology to get people's input so we can create a charter on compassion, analogous to some degree to the Charter on Human Rights that's part of the United Nations that René Cassin helped to compose. And sadly, that Human Rights Commission is often taking steps and actions on the part of some of its member nations who are not observing human rights. But the idea that we share this world with one another and that we have that element of compassion at the core of our religious practices. You can't imagine a religious practice devoid of compassion. And so I was honored to be one of the initial 12 participants, lead participants in the Charter on Compassion, and we shared with one another what compassion means to us. And then thousands, tens of thousands of people gave their input on compassion so we could create that Charter on Compassion that would live as a document that we can all look to express our common humanity. For me, this was a great deal of what the quest for the meaning of life is about, practicing compassion in our daily lives and understanding that without it, we have the conflict, we have the hatreds that Marilyn and I were briefly starting to look at prior to the beginning of the program. So I also wanted to acknowledge that for so many of us, compassion seems remote. Compassion seems distant. Compassion seems something that demands our attention during extreme moments. But the truth is, we can practice compassion in small ways constantly. We have this wonderful month that is designated as the Random Acts of Kindness Month. And some of you may have read about this, that during the course of this month, people start to think about how I might be able to act kindly to someone. And you've heard the story that maybe you pay the check for the person behind you, or if you're driving on a freeway and a tollway and there's a toll, you pay the toll for a complete stranger who's in the car behind you. You do something without any motivation except to be kind and to be compassionate and understanding. And I think that we have the ability to do this. And if we can focus on a month directed towards compassion, that means this can be part of our makeup. But like anything, it has to be practice. It has to become a practice. Otherwise, it's lost. It fades away. In Jewish tradition, there is a word which means loving kindness, hesed. Now, hesed, some people think is the biblical mandate, love your neighbor as yourself. But hesed is more than that. It's being kind to someone who does not deserve your kindness. Can you imagine going up to a person who's been very difficult with you or grouchy and beginning to treat them with kindness? It requires a special kind of sensitivity and an ability to divorce yourself from your ego so that you can treat that person who probably needs it more than most people to be treated with a little kindness and decency. I've done this in my life experience. I was in the post office and I was sending some documents out and purchasing some stamps. And the woman behind the counter had a growl on her face. She was very upset. And I looked at her and I said, wow, that's a beautiful necklace you have on. And she said, yes, my son gave it to me for the birthday. And a big smile came on her face that this was acknowledged. And it changed her whole demeanor. I'm telling you, it was like I was speaking to a different person. So through a small compliment, through an act of kindness, we can transform others' perspective. And I think that promotes peace in our world and that promotes unity in our world. A lot has been written lately about how our young people, especially during the pandemic, but even before, have become addicted to their social media connections. And I have to say that that has denied them the interpersonal relationship component of life. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a very prominent trainer and nutritionist. and he has 2 young children, and he wants them to exercise and to eat healthfully. And he limits their social media and technology time to when they're on the treadmill. So he said, okay, you get on the treadmill or on the bicycle and you do your 35, your 40 minutes of exercising, and you can be on the technology while you're exercising. But the minute you're off, we shut it down. Exercising, that kind of self-discipline is very difficult because we become addicted to our devices. I think for many of us, we've read about this syndrome where your phone is left at home, but yet you feel a vibration in your pocket where your phone used to be, and that's completely imaginary. Your phone isn't there, it's not vibrating, but you feel this syndrome where you feel this vibration as if it's almost a part of you physically. And many of us have allowed that to happen. We've been seduced by technology and social media, and we haven't attempted to curb our appetite for that kind of endeavor. I know that when it's eating something that's unhealthy, we curb our tendency to engage or to indulge. But yet we haven't done that with technology because it's been such a subtle, growing kind of connection that in many cases we haven't recognized it. And that to me denies us what the purpose of life is about for me, connecting with other people face to face, person to person, having those deep transformative opportunities that can only be had or that are best had in a face-to-face human communication and interaction. So there are a few quotes I want to share as I conclude. Pablo Casals, who was the wonderful musician and artist, said, "For him, the thing that gives life its deepest meaning is the capacity to care." And I think that's a profound statement. Many of us, because of some of our preoccupations or our addictions, have lost the capacity to care. And when we rejuvenate the capacity to care, it changes our perspective. The other great quote that I want to share is about the true meaning of life is planting a tree under whose shade you do not expect to sit. In other words, you're doing it for future generations. You're doing it as a selfless act to see a future for humanity. And that to me is also another component of the true purpose of life, what we do for future generations in how we address issues of the climate, pollution, how we address a whole host of issues like disease. We're doing it not necessarily for us to benefit from, but so that the next generation might benefit from it. So I leave you with a few of those thoughts, and with great enthusiasm, I'm looking forward to hearing what Marilyn has to share.
Thank you for that. What a beautiful and inspiring set of observations. I'm grateful for that. I was thinking about this remarkable study that has taken place at Harvard University. For 75 years, they have been tracking men who were boys, and now some of them in their late 90s, to talk to them about what gives them meaning and how is it that they're happier and healthier. And so it was really, what is the essence of happiness? And I think so much of what you said about the social media and, the abstractions that people are pulled away from one another. And the number one thing here, thank you. The number one thing that they observed after 75 years is that it's about relationships. And that ultimately, when they looked at all the biological and psychological tests that they had done, the neurophysiological tests, the common variable for those men who were happiest and healthiest was good, solid relationships. And I guess I don't mind so much the deviation from our proximity. the fact that we can connect in the way that we're connecting using Zoom, I think is a really powerful and important tool. And I think particularly for people who maybe can't get out or who don't have access, we're lucky that we have this technology at this point in time. So relationship is really fundamental. And I think that this idea of compassion is a beautiful and powerful one. And we also need to recognize that it is about self-compassion. These men had this capacity to feel intimacy with their partners and their family and their friends, but they also had the capacity to understand their own dynamics and what gave them purpose and meaning in life. And I think that that's, a beautiful observation. And another thing that they discovered is that, a lot of these men who are now, in these wisdom years, weren't always this way. It wasn't always that they were committed to having these positive relationships. They were people who, when they were young, had these same ambitions. They wanted money, or they wanted power, or they wanted fame. But as time went on and, their wisdom brain clicked in, it became clear that there was something more in terms of this quest for meaning in our lives. So I wanted to say that, and I wanted to also touch on this idea of what gets you out of bed in the morning. And I actually think about that quite a lot. And it's intention that directs us. And so what is intention? It is this direction towards something. And so are we propelled to get out of bed for these, accomplishments of the outside world? Or are we propelled in order to find the beauty of the day? And these ideas and these insights don't always come naturally. We can learn them. So one of the things that I have been grateful to be involved in is a program looking at worldview transformation. And how is it that we can shift our perspective? How can we begin to see the world in a different way? And oftentimes the catalyst for a worldview transformation is something painful, something that strips us from the steady state and the status quo. We might lose a job, or the death of a loved one, or a personal illness. All of these things can be life-changing. And it can cause us to reflect on what is meaningful to me, and why do I feel empty? Why do I feel lonely? And what we were able to do is map people's process from this state of alienation and estrangement to something that ultimately is about living deeply and living with purpose and integrity. And so we collected, first of all, letters from people. We invited them to tell us what, have you ever had one of these experiences? And if so, what were the catalysts of it? And what were the consequences of it? What did you notice that really changed? And we found that many people, thousands of people, wrote back to us and said that they'd had these experiences. We then convened focus groups with teachers, masters who felt they were able to teach people how to transform in these life-affirming ways. And from that, we created a set of questions, 20 questions. And we went out and we interviewed masters from different world traditions, some of them ancient traditions, some of them more emergent traditions. We looked at, most of the major spiritual and religious denominations and groupings. And so what we wanted to do is see what, triggered their transformation, and what did they need to do in order to begin to live a new way. And that required practice. And so we talk about the spiritual practices or the religious practices or even scientific practices. What is it that we have to work on and repeat, And yet here we were talking to masters from all these different traditions. And, we had a pagan witch and a Catholic priest involved in the same project. And there was a time when they couldn't really talk to each other very well without burning one at the stake. And so we were trying to find the kind of perennial qualities across these traditions that can help people to learn to live into these affirming worldviews. And so we discovered there were 5 qualities of a practice. And the first one was setting intention. I hold this intention to, create a positive life path for myself, to be of service. But we know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so that alone was not enough. The second principle that these different teachers shared with us was attention. So where do I place my attention? Is it on the glass half empty or the glass half full? Am I able to make choices about where I'm placing what I give priority to? So many of the spiritual and contemplative traditions really shift our attention from that outer world to our own inner experiences and beginning to really cultivate that awareness. One of the wonderful things in cognitive science now is this thing called inattentional blindness. And that is that our culture primes us to pay attention to certain things, like how much money we have, or what kind of car we drive, or, what neighborhood we live in, whatever that is. And yet, when we start to begin to really question this quest for the meaning of life, it begins to shift where we place our attention. And so we can begin to see things in a new way. So that was the second principle. The third was repetition. So just like if you go to the gym and you're working on a particular muscle group and trying to really get into shape, whether or not you're listening to your social media. And it's about developing new habits and new ways of defaulting. So instead of letting our amygdala be hijacked by all of the negativity, we can begin to build a habit of resilience and positivity. So this idea of practice and repetition becomes important. The fourth piece that we found was guidance. And this guidance idea, I would say 99% of the masters that we interviewed had a teacher, somebody that they trusted who could help them along the path. But there's also this idea of inner guidance and where is my internal compass directing me? And so learning to listen and really refine our capacity to trust our own interiority and to know what's right. What are our values? What are our morals? Where are our ethics? What constitutes beauty in our lives? And then the fifth piece was this idea of surrender. That there is a sense that the world has many complexities and there is a lot of pain and suffering. We know that. And one thing we can do is instead of feeling the suffering for all of that, we can begin to surrender to a sense of appreciation and reverence for what is so. And in that, having compassion for the world and having compassion for those people that, as you said, could be difficult for us to deal with. So these practices become important. And then a number of the teachers talked about how important it is to get off the pillow and out into the world. So how do we move from my own inner journey to this participation from the me to the we? And we know that we, need to recognize and nurture ourselves so that, we don't have this giving fatigue that can happen. But at the same time, we can begin to recognize that we are co-participants in this unfolding mystery of life. And so how can we, gain access to the ways in which we can contribute to the world? And I think, a recognition of, the suffering of our own mortality, the fact that we will be moving to some different dimension, as you talked about earlier, becomes an important part of our quest for the meaning of life and our ability to live in right relationship. And ultimately, I think that this model that we developed out of the research really speaks to not only our inner transformation and our ability to harness, our own wisdom as we move through life, but we can also begin to apply this at a systems level and to think about how do we bring these principles of compassion and loving kindness to all of the organizations in our life, whether it's our workplace or, medical interactions, if we're healthcare professionals, something, related to how we can bring loving kindness to the people we're interacting with, as well as to ourselves, or our educational system, or our community groups. So I feel like the topic that we're engaged in tonight and, this pursuit of a deeper understanding of what inspires each of us to be our best selves is really an engaging and important question. So I turn it back to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Marilyn. So many gems of wisdom in what you shared, and I thank you for that. And I'd like to riff on a couple of them, if I may, one of which is how we implement a young girl, 16 years old, in my synagogue, said, "Dad, we can't sit here during this quarantine and not do something to help the organizations." So they had an artist, a musician, sit in his pajamas in front of the piano and play a song, and people pledged money to hear a different song. And that was money directed towards a whole host of different charities. Well, they hoped to raise a few $1,000s for a specific clinic, a women's clinic. They ended up raising close to $40,000. And before you knew it, because her dad was a very prominent music agent, Elton John came and sat down in his pajamas and played his piano in his living room. And the pledges just went viral. And this began to take on a life of its own. It's called Quarantunes instead of quarantine, Quarantunes. And to date, it's raised $27 million for different charities in the community, especially frontline workers. So I think, there is this capacity to innovate and to give willingly. One of my great experiences in my life was interviewing a hero of mine who died a number of years ago, but I got to interview him before he died, Dr. Jonas Salk. Yeah. Dr. Salk helped develop the polio vaccine. And in the 50s and 60s, even into the 70s, there was this terrible disease that crippled young people, that crippled children. And Dr. Salk developed this vaccine. And he was a brilliant scientist. And people questioned the efficacy of his vaccination. And so he vaccinated himself, his wife, and his own children to prove the concept. And then at the end of it all, he gave this vaccine away. You think about Pfizer and Moderna and the kinds of billions of dollars they're going to be making from distributing this vaccine. Dr. Salk gave the polio vaccine away to humanity. He couldn't conceive of charging for it. That vaccine, I'm told by experts in that field, would be worth somewhere between $7 and $8 billion by today's standards. But Dr. Salk wouldn't hear of it. He simply gave it away. And I think at the end of life, you want to be judged by what you've done, what you did without an expectation, selflessly, not just for yourself and your family, but for others. There was this Korean pastor who came up with this really interesting idea about end of life. And it had to do with what people are going to say about you at your funeral. And so he experimented. He brought a coffin into the church and he had different people lie down in the coffin. And he did a mock funeral where people spoke about the alleged deceased. And they got to hear what people were saying about them. And in many cases, they recognized that they hadn't accomplished enough of what they truly wanted to accomplish in their life. And it was transformative. It changed their whole perspective, much in the way that you described, that sometimes an experience of pain or loss can transform you in ways that you might not otherwise choose to pursue. So I think that there's a lot of truth to that, and there's also truth to being thankful for the gifts that we have. Every morning I do a thankfulness meditation, and to me it's very powerful because it sets my intention for the day. And I know it's not just simply what I intend or want to do, it's what I actually end up accomplishing. So the intention can drive the action. Sometimes they get disconnected. They must drive the intention. There's a beautiful custom in a Jewish marriage ceremony where the groom places a ring on the right index finger of the bride. The reason for that is legal. If two witnesses saw a man place a ring on a woman's finger, they'd be considered married. You didn't need a ceremony. That act of betrothal was the placing of the ring. And so by the right index finger, it was clearly witnessed that he placed the ring on the finger. The Kabbalists in Jewish mystical tradition came up with a different interpretation. They said that finger has a vein that goes from the hand to the heart. And the teaching is that it should not just simply be the feelings of love you have in your heart, but what you do with your actions, with your hands, to show your love for that individual. And so it's a combination of both the intention and the powerful feeling of love and the acts that you undertake for someone that you truly care about. So for me, these are part of the disciplines that you spoke of in describing the structure and the ritual and the practice that are so critical to really making this a part of our life so that our life does have fulfillment and meaning.
It's one of the things I love about Judaism is the service orientation of the teaching and the child rearing and coming into a life where you know that it's about something bigger than yourself. So I'm grateful for that. You reminded me of a study that was done by a social epidemiologist by the name of Jeff Levin. And Jeff had been quite successful in getting big grants to do research on the health effects of religiosity. And he found that you could correlate, religious participation and spiritual participation with positive health outcomes. And he was really interested, when you go to these religious communities or spiritual communities, there can be this palpable sense of altruism, that generosity toward others for no reason other than just to be giving love. And so he wanted to study this. He wanted to see if there was something about altruism that could be a factor. And, there's various reasons why people in religious community are healthier. They eat better. They have that nurturing community to support them. They have healthier lifestyles. But there is this sense of love. And so he went back to all the big foundations and asked if he could do this project. And they were very clear, you can't do research on love. So forget about it. And at that time, I was at IONS and I was able to raise some funds to support his research. And so he took Sorokin's work on altruism, and he was a famous sociologist who really believed that this generosity toward others could really be helpful for humanity. And he sort of codified that and created a survey instrument. And so he was able to collect data from thousands of people and to look at their self-reports of health and their self-reports of altruism. And he found, in fact, that it correlated. So I always thought it was a really kind of revolutionary study in the sense that you might not change people's behaviors for the right reason, but if you get them to sort of fake it till you make it, and they start realizing that, if I'm generous to someone else, maybe it's going to support me. And then those
karmic wheel
get to build. Exactly. So it's fascinating. And I think these virtues, altruism, gratefulness, forgiveness, compassion, are all so fundamental to how we can grow into a more trusting, compassionate, loving civilization.
I think self-love is a great component of that. One of the things that I'm working on now is a new book and a seminar called Midnight Confession and Correction. And the idea that you release things from your past that may have held you back from achieving your goals in life, traumatic events, but also just emotional setbacks. And by confessing them and expressing them and releasing them, you begin to take those first steps towards self-love, which has often been tied up with the denial of self-love because of some stain that you perceive or that was foisted on you. And I think self-love is the beginning. The Hebrew word for peace is shalom, but shalom doesn't really mean peace. Shalom means wholeness, comes from the root shalem, which means when you've integrated all the parts of yourself, the light side, the dark side, the entire total corpus of the person, united, complete, you're able to project love and take actions of love towards others. So I feel that self-love is one of the primary first steps that one must take towards achieving a fulfillment in life's purpose. Are we going to take some questions, Marilyn? What do you think? Should we, have we hit the time?
Raymond, you can guide us on this. I did want to say, you and I have walked such similar paths. It's amazing. So I interviewed Jonas Salk. Wonderful, amazing experience. Yeah, many moons ago. It was back when I was in Texas, and truly brilliant. And it kind of raises another point, which is generativity and creativity. I feel like that's part of the quest for the meaning of life. I think having that ability to see the creative in nature, feel the creativity in our own, desire to produce something new that could benefit the world. And I think those are very great intentions for getting us out of bed in the morning. Raymond?
This is wonderful, but I'd like to get back to the one thing that the rabbi mentioned about is doing a ceremony for passing away, right? Have people living in the casket. And I remember there's a famous book called The Tuesdays with Morrie.
Tuesdays with Morrie, yes.
In which he did this, he wanted to have ceremony about his passing while he's alive.
Right.
And I wonder what, Marilyn, your book, Does Make Life Possible. How does that implicate in this particular sense?
Well, I believe fundamentally that it is the sphere of our own mortality that leads to a lot of the aberrant behaviors. So, our sense of otherness. So we project on people who are different from us. And a lot of that comes from what is this idea of terror management, or our awareness of our own mortality that then triggers us to, if we don't have the right context, be very aggressive and hostile toward others. So I think, cultivating death awareness and creating conversations around it. We interviewed a Sufi master for the Death Makes Life Possible project, and they do a similar thing. They go to the cemeteries and they lay down next to the burial sites, and they envision, their own bodies decaying. And so it's I think there are some perennial aspects to these kinds of death awareness practices that can be very helpful.
One of my favorite quotes I'd like to share. It's from the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote a piece on success. And we often think of success as being out there, that we achieve it in a grand, large way. But he said, success is to laugh often, to love much, to win the respect of intelligent persons, the affection of children, to earn the approbation of honest critics, to endure betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to give of oneself, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child or a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to have played and laughed with enthusiasm and sung with exultation, and to know that even one life has breathed a bit easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded in life. And I think that's a powerful statement about how the opportunity for finding meaning in life and living a successful life is right before us.
I love that. That's a beautiful quote. And I think, we're playing with this in this ping pong way, some of these concepts that we really do need to work with. And I think, this idea of forgiveness. I have a good friend, Azim Kamisa, who lost his son, who was, getting ready to go to college. He was a bright, shining light. And he was delivering pizzas one night and he was killed by a gang member for an initiation. And Azim, also Sufi, had this idea. I guess he had a conversation with the shooter's grandfather, who was Christian, and they began to work with their own pain and their relationship with this young boy who, really was in just a bad situation, and everybody was in a bad situation. And so he wrote a book called The Bulletproof. I can't remember the title of his book. He's written a few, but he ended up befriending the grandfather. They started going on a lecture tour together to talk about forgiveness. And he befriended the shooter, who was then in prison and has been in prison for 20 years. He's just gotten out this past year. And in that process, he worked with him. He prepared him for a job at the foundation that was set up for his son. And I think that that's just a brilliant example of transformation and how we can bring these principles of our spirituality into those, trenches of pain and suffering.
Forgiveness is so powerful. I attended a forgiveness conference in Tiburon, where they held each year a seminar to deal with both the study of forgiveness, which was happening at Stanford University, which has an entire study of forgiveness. Dr. Fred Luskin runs that program. And they had exemplars, people whose life had been powerfully affected by forgiving. And one of them, I'll never forget her, was this woman, Abelina. She and her husband were new immigrants to the United States. He was a gardener. She started taking her real estate license, became wildly successful, selling homes in Northern California and Novato. And the husband came in one day extremely jealous of her and shot her numerous times. They airlifted her to the hospital, and the doctor said, all these spinal injuries, you'll never be able to move your hands or legs again. You'll never be able to feed yourself again. And Abelina described how one night in the hospital, she had a dream. And the dream was that her husband threw himself at her feet, kissed her feet, and begged her to forgive him. And she forgave him. And her fingers started to move. And she started making a recovery that none of the doctors predicted was possible. And now she feeds herself. She's able to move about. She can't walk yet. She's still doing a lot of rehabilitation therapy. But many of the things they said would never happen have started to happen for her. So powerful is that forgiveness. And, I concur with you on that. Raymond, I think we need to take some questions because time is growing short.
Yeah, any question?
Rabbi, I will say again, our worlds are interconnected. So I work with Fred Luskin at Sophia University. He's on the faculty with me. Right. And I learned so much from him about forgiveness. And it was this idea that forgiving someone doesn't mean you accept or condone their behavior. It means you let go of the charge, in which case then forgiving another person is really life enhancing for yourself. And that was just an epiphany for me. And it's stayed with me all this time.
Well, he's a remarkable man, the work he's done. And he studied the mind-body connection between forgiveness and the impact on the release of certain endorphins, the release of certain chemicals in the body. And these studies were done over a period of 10 years. So it's quite a corpus of scientific data on the power of forgiveness.
So there's one more piece he did a project with women in Northern Ireland who had lost their children from violence.
Catholic and Protestant, yes. Catholic and Protestant.
Catholic and Protestant. So your earplugs, I think, are causing some crackling on the line, just so you know. Anyway, he brought these women into the lab at Stanford, and they went through this emotional intelligence training, and they really were able to build a relationship across these different religions and worldviews. And then they went home. And when they got home, their communities didn't want to forgive.
Correct.
And I think that's also one of those enlightened, observations that we are embedded, and so we can begin to shift our own awareness, but it often requires that we shift our community as well so that we are supported in this exploration.
It takes one enlightened person, one person who's transformed in this way to have an impact. And look at what Raymond has done by calling us together to go on this quest. And that, I hope, will raise the level of enlightenment among all of the participants in this program. So I thank you, Raymond, for your effort.
And here are a couple questions. First one is, I would like to ask our two honorable speakers, what are your tips on combating compassion fatigue? That's an interesting question.
Well, sometimes one has to take a break. I think this is part of the move from the me to the we is you have to have right balance. So it's not as though that means that I'm going to give up my own healing journey or my own self-preservation. I have to take care and nurture myself in order to be able to really engage in the world. So I think the first thing is that, and then, recognizing that I interviewed all these nurses about this compassion fatigue, and we talked about what were some little things you could do. And, they stash little candies or little nutrition bars in places so that when they're racing from one side to the other, they could take care of making sure they have something to eat. Just little things like that. Or one doctor told me after seeing a client, he'll blow up a balloon and then let it go. And that allows him to sort of purge the previous and then be fully present for the next patient. Little things can go a long way.
I would concur with that completely, but also I'd add, look at the source of your compassion fatigue and try to analyze exactly what it is so that you can modify it and you can regulate it in terms of the actions you're taking. If you're caring for an elderly parent and you're doing it alone 12 hours a day, you need to look at how that's unacceptable level of care, and that no human being, no Superman is capable of doing that, or Superwoman. So you need to think about how you engage others to help you in that process so you can take the break you need. So analyze and look at what is the source of that fatigue.
Well, here's another question. I would like to learn more about the surrender aspect of the 5 main qualities of masters.
That's a great question. I think it is the work. And, we can have our intention and be directed. And then it's like, well, I'm going to surrender right now. And then the next intention comes up and I start to pursue that. And I ping pong through my intentions. And so I think the work is really on surrender and how we can cultivate that sense of perfection in the moment. And for me, cultivation of beauty is a really important way to facilitate my own awareness, and then know that, I raise pumpkins, and, at some point in the season, they die. And one day I went out and I had taken an old rotting pumpkin and put it in a wine barrel, and I just put it there. I wasn't intending anything. And I went out and it was filled with all these little baby pumpkin plants. And so there was this regenerative nature of the life cycle that came when, there was an end, and the end was appropriate, and then the life bubbled up. So surrender is a practice, and I think it's the one that for myself is one of the hardest to work on, and also one of the most gratifying when we achieve it.
Well, last week, one of our speakers, Napoleon, talked about his journey. He talked about 3 phases of his life. One is do what I love to do. Second phase is I love what I do. The third phase is I do what I do. And I think the third phase looks like a surrender.
It's an interesting word. I have found that people, particularly in America, don't like the idea of surrender. So I have come to use the word acceptance more often, because surrender means I lost. And that's not what it means.
Right.
It means you've yielded to something greater. But people in this country are very adverse. The other thing they're adverse to is forgiveness. I have on numerous occasions organized events, and we would have these breakout sessions. And the one session that often didn't fill was forgiveness, because people just don't really want to let go of those grudges. So that's something else for us to look at when we're reflecting.
On surrender, you mentioned let go. There's a great expression in the therapy community, let go, let God, in the religious therapy community, that sometimes you have to release to a higher power and say, I've done everything I can do now. Now I release it to a higher power, to the universe, to God, whatever your conception of God may be. And I think that is a moment when we come to it that can be very powerful for each and every one of us to know we don't have control over every facet of our lives. And that is very humbling and very powerful.
But what we have control over is how we react to those things in life.
Yes.
And so that's where we can begin to cultivate our own inner capacities.
Oh, I have a comment here from David Block.
Yes.
David, would you share your comment openly?
Is it written?
David, would you share it yourself?
Who do you want him to talk to? Which person you want to?
Oh, David Block.
Sorry,
He said
me?
cannot.
Yeah,
Can you unmute him?
David Black.
Block, B-L-O-C-K.
Okay, hold on.
Is this Robert Block's son?
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Try that now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello, everyone. A great series. I very, very much enjoyed listening to that. And obviously, my father is at the forefront of my thoughts during this whole thing. And it reminded me this last part of it, lots of things. It's going to help me with the eulogy, quite frankly. But one of the last things that you guys were talking about, and was talked about at the last one, was about the the 3 steps. And Dad used to say to do the right thing, to do it for the right reasons, and then to do it right to the best of your ability. And really that kind of goes along with what you were all just talking about. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing that you're testing, do it right and change, prepare for change before it's necessary. I mean,
That's a good addition. You're absolutely right. And change is changing faster than anything.
I like to just share that Block is just a wonderful, great friend and inspiration for me. And he has, in his lifetime, he has more than 150 US international patents covering all kinds of fields. I mean, he has created over 50 companies in 3 continents. The guy when he was 90, he's still working on innovation. All right, and most unfortunately, that my dear friend Bob passed away a few days ago, peacefully, with his son David, and started Debbie taking care of him. Debbie is also around. And I'd like to come back to Rabbi's early offering, that to help to share prayer for Bob, and to probably this is, since we are, David just shared Bob's view, perhaps this is the right time that if the Rabbi doesn't mind to do that.
Sure, it'd be my honor and pleasure. And we can close our eyes and picture Bob and pray that the Almighty Source, the Creator, watch over and protect the soul of our beloved Bob, whom we promise to remember often and with love, and perform deeds of loving kindness in his memory as a great tribute to the man. And he was a remarkable man. We pray that his soul forever rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
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 Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that.
Do we have any further question from the audience? And if not, I'd like to go back to Marilyn's 5 steps of transformation, because that has been proving to be a dramatic and wonderful guidance in terms of changing the world view from I to we, as the first 2 speakers last week shared about. And I'd like to have a question for the Rabbi to comment on this one, because your book talk about the dramatic transformation that Moses has guided the Israelis, and and I wonder whether that guidance and what Marilyn talk about 5 steps have some synergy, and perhaps expressed in different ways. And Rabbi, do you mind to answer that question?
It'd be my pleasure. I think there are steps to transformation. What occurred here was also a recognition that the transformation might not occur in one generation. It might be multi-generational. So when Moses was leading the Israelites out, they were constantly fearful. They were possessed of that slave mentality. They had just recently been released from slavery. They were used to having everything done for them as they labored as slaves for the Pharaoh of Egypt. And now they were a free people, but they didn't know how to process freedom. So releasing yourself from preconceived notions of your limitations is a very important first step in that process of being able to transform into the person you want to be. Next, accepting that freedom doesn't simply mean freedom from an enslavement. It means freedom to restrict yourself or to act in a certain way. So many of the commandments that they accepted were commandments that restricted tendencies that were within every human being to commit adultery, to covet someone else's possessions, to steal, to lie, to bear false witness, that now you were saying, here is a set of standards I want to live up to. And as I transform, I recognize that my freedom is freedom to be able to embrace these standards and not simply be free from all standards of behavior. So these are part of a transformational process that occurred in the experience of 40 years of wandering in the desert. And I think that's the last point, that sometimes you don't get to the promised land, and sometimes you don't transform, and accepting the reality that for some people that might never occur. So it might take another incarnation for that to occur. And I think the acceptance of that reality is also a great part of a person's transformation.
Well, we have some, thank you. We have somebody raised her hand. Fei Song raised her hand, and Tamamas Young, can you unmute her?
No question.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for all your talks. So I have some thinking recently. I will start it from my understanding. Please give me some guidance. So in my understanding, the myth edited our soul, and the technology edited our body. I already sent my thinking to our group chat to all the people so that everyone can know what I'm talking about. It's because like we have been talking about enlightenment and awakening for so long time for human beings. There are still so many wars and bad things happens everywhere. So I have been thinking, what if the myth was wrong? Like, what if we actually consider we are human being, but not? We have the holiness, the divinity inside of us, like the Buddha said, everyone is a Buddha, or there's a Buddha hidden inside of us. Means this comes back to the promises who stolen the light from human being, and we start to cherish promises. But what about if we are the group of gods living in the heaven? This means the human being, the world now we are living actually were paradise, actually were heaven. But because we thought we have the original sins, so we started to have a lower standard for our life, for human beings around us. We started to look down to find the mistakes or the wrong side of human being, rather than to look up. Well, it's come back to Marilyn's talks, to based on the love of the compassion, and to evolve our thoughts or our our soul. So I just I think aloud. What if everything is being designed and edited wrongly? So what if I just think, what if now is the time to upgrade the whole world's belief, to challenge our oldest myths, to stand up for our divinity? Because if we want to upgrade the whole human being's thinking level, you have to dig back to the oldest myths, to date back to the soul level, the collection of the whole world's collection soul level. Oh, thank you so much. So is that possible? It's a big challenge to the whole world's religion, but connected with Buddhism.
I think that this is a beautiful point, and in particular, the idea of these myths. And I guess what I want to say is I think it's time for a new myth and a new story. And as we are developing all this understanding of the cosmos, and we're recognizing our prowess around technology, and we're also rediscovering the roots of our deep spirituality, that it's time to reframe the story in a way that I think is along the lines of the love and the divinity within.
I'd also like to add that this concept of the universal soul is a very powerful concept, especially as we look at the macro and the micro. The micro, the DNA that we share with every other human being, and the macro, the fact that science now tells us, astrophysicists, that there are not billions of planets, there are hundreds of billions of planets in our universe. And we can't even begin to conceive of what is called an endless universe. So our recognition of our common humanity is very powerful right now. And I think that this can be a transformational component for all human beings of every ethnicity, of every race, of every group. We're all in this together as human beings, and we share this common DNA and this common recognition of how small we are in terms of the vast solar systems and universe itself.
Well, thank you. And we have one more question. I think we have time is up. A question from Grace. Thank you for such a great and inspiring talk. Can you share where can we learn more about the compassion chapter that you mentioned?
Oh yes, if you go to YouTube, or if you go to Charter on Compassion, it was a TED program, TED, Charter on Compassion. You will see all of the different religious leaders who gave their explanation of what compassion means in their faith tradition and to them. So go to Charter on Compassion, either on YouTube or TED, and you will find the charter itself.
Well, if there's no other question, I think we are a few minutes over time. But
overtime, but very good overtime.
Really thank the two outstanding speakers of this evening, which shared tremendous inspirational stories and their insight for us, for all of us to learn in this very complicated and dynamic world. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, all the audience. And I think before we leave, I'd like to ask Dharma Master Jin Yong to make a dedication of merit of this evening's talk.
Do you want to announce the next talk? 2 weeks from today.
Thank you.
Please go ahead. Yeah, we also have two outstanding speakers.
Not next week, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks from today, we have two outstanding, and one is Naveen from Singapore, He is the head of 5th generation business, the oldest business in Singapore. But he is also the international director of the Contentment Foundation. And the other person is Dr. Fua Sobrino from Brazil. And he has done many, many things. But most importantly, since he's very young, he has been helping people throughout Brazil in little villages to big cities, helping poor people. He was instrumental in getting Brazil's national program on food security established. That means instead of Social Security, everybody has food. All right. So you're welcome to 2 weeks from now, today, the two wonderful speakers to talk about their quest for meaning of life. And I want to take this opportunity to really thank you, our two dynamic speakers this evening, Rabbi Baron and Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. Now I go back to Dhamma Master Yo for the dedication of merit.
Before we dedicate merit, just a quick announcement for next Sunday. We don't have the forum. The reason being that we are going to have a session, a quiet session, starting next Sunday. That's why the forum is
I see. Okay,
for 1
sorry.
week. And we'll go back to our regular lecture series next Sunday. And to be kind of consistent with what's going on. So there's a monk is going to share with us his own quest for the meaning of life.
Wow, that's wonderful.
So it will be part of this forum.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
it's the Zoom link will remain the same. I believe this link will remain the same. From now on, actually, we have a YouTube link. This is going to remain the same every week. It's going to be the same. So there will be more convenient for everyone. We found out the way to do that. So, and with that, we'll dedicate merit. And I think what we'll do is chant in Chinese, and there's an English translation there. So we just read the English translation. 愿以此功德庄严佛净土，上报四重恩，下济三途苦。若有见闻者，悉发菩提心。 尽此一报身，同生极乐国。In respect to the Venerable Master, thank you, the two speakers, and also Ray, and also our translator, Wally, and everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Namaste. Raymond, you still there?